So let's move to the issue of the day, of the hour. Load shedding is going to be increased to stage 4. Already has 1,400 hours this afternoon. It started. It will last until 2,200 hours tonight. From 2,200 hours, South Africa will return to stage 2. Lungile Mashele is an energy analyst. He joins me now to talk about this. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us, Lungile. Let's just first start with breaking it down so that you and I, who aren't electricians, who aren't operators of the system, understand what exactly does stage 4 literally mean in terms of how much is being removed from the grid, and how does that help switching off lights to give us lights?
So stage 4 is basically 4,000 megawatts is what we require before we go into a complete blackout. So what Eskom is requiring of us is to reduce consumption, and in a forced manner through load shedding of 4,000 megawatts. And that's exactly what it means, ultimately. If we do not do this, we risk collapsing the entire grid and going into a complete blackout, which would then mean that we do not have electricity as a country for at least the next 2 to 6 weeks, depending on how fast they can get the system up and running. But it's important to then caution that there are at least 8 stages of this load shedding. So you can go all the way up to about 8,000 megawatts, and they do have that allowance.
So one would typically say this is evident in terms of the length of time or the frequency of load shedding, but there are people who are sometimes impacted because they get their power from both either the city or from Eskom, and then they end up being load shed twice. So how does that work in terms of equity?
So basically, what was introduced, and I know in the city of Johannesburg, was that previously people would get 4 hours of load shedding during any bout, whether it's stage 2 or stage 6. And this was broken up into 2 so that at least you had 2 hours and that you could recover. And this was done primarily for businesses in Johannesburg that were struggling. For most municipalities, they were on a 2-hour schedule in any case, such as city of Tshwane. So people, what they're starting to actually realize now that it's happening more frequently, and in some cases, people are reporting that instead of the 2 hours, they are now going on, off for 6 hours or for 8 hours or for 12 hours. And in those cases, Eskom has come back to say perhaps it's a municipal fault, or perhaps there was like a trip when it was coming back, or there are other additional issues. Which are related to either Eskom or the municipality itself.
Now, interestingly enough, City Power has itself at some point saying that it also impacts on their infrastructure, that City Power in the city of Johannesburg saying that it has resulted in financial and operational damage being done. So how then is this beneficial?
So load shedding is ultimately to benefit the state utility, which is Eskom, to ensure that we do not go into a complete blackout. For municipalities, however, it's a very different issue, because they now have to deal with abrupt changes in supply demand. They need to switch off customers. They now need to look at various loads. People are using electricity at different times of the day, whether it's industry, commerce. And as they switch on the electricity, there is the inherent danger that there might be a trip. And because infrastructure in most municipalities is aged and is not being taken care of and maintained on a regular basis, it's very easy for trips to happen, fires to happen, a transformer blowout. So for municipalities in particular, when load shedding happens, it has dire impacts on their distribution network, ultimately.
There's also the economic impact of load shedding. I know that this particular stage 4 is as a result of breakdowns of the Midupi and Duva power station units there. But we reported, Stats SA was saying that there was an economic recovery. Is this going to undo all of this? And taking into account this as President Cyril Ramaphosa goes to the G7 to try and promote us as a country to invest in.
You know, it's unfortunate that people tend to downplay or rather to ignore the impacts of not having electricity on a country's economic growth. You cannot grow an economy when you do not have electricity. So as the president goes and he markets us as an investment destination, the very first thing that will be asked is, do you have reliable electricity supply, of which we do not have? Take the case in point. I mean, yesterday there was a company, Clover, and they're saying that they're shutting down in the northwest. One of the things that they highlight is the lack of reliable electricity. You can't possibly run any company, whether it's mechanized, whether it's industrialized, whether it's service-based, call center. It doesn't matter what company you want to run. If there's no electricity, you're not going to run that company. And the load shedding that we are having, which, mind you, in 2020 was the worst on record. And it looks like 2021 might just exceed that. So literally, we are killing our economy by not having sufficient electricity, ultimately.
So let's give our viewers a practical example of that. Thank you for your time and your insight, Lungile Mashele, energy analyst. So as we mentioned, Eskom is intensifying load shedding amid high electricity demand and several breakdowns as reported at power stations, as we mentioned.